Okay. Amazing. So. Morning, Alamal. Morning. Morning. Right, we wrote on the title, my apologies, disclaimer, we wrote on the title that we'll be carrying on a little bit about Shabbos that we've been speaking about over the last several times we've met together. I just asked permission from my esteemed friend and the honorary gentleman on the right, as we say in British politics, to deviate today because I had something nice about Sukkot that I thought maybe you'd enjoy listening to, and it's kind of in line with what we've been doing, as you'll see. So I did actually bring my notes for the Shir on Shabbos, in case everyone says, sorry, we object, it's Shabbos or you're out. So I brought
notes, for next time.
But for next time.
For next time.
Yeah, right, I want to talk to you about some ideas of building sukkahs. It's very technical. I very much like it because it's in line with what we've done until now, which is rather than speak about the particular detail of Hilchos Shabbos, we've been focusing on the klolim, on the general ideas, the foundational ideas that the laws of Shabbos develop upon. So we spoke about doing things accidentally, and we spoke about doing one thing and something else resulting from it. We spoke about these things. And in every area of halacha, you find building blocks from which multiple vistas, avenues open up of detail of halacha. Hilchos Sukkah is one of the most, I'm not such an incredible maven of halacha, but Hilchos Sukkah is incredibly complicated, and very few people even have the faintest idea of how many different technicalities there are when it comes to building the sukkah. Now, before anyone gets nervous, nowadays we have less to worry about. Let's put it that way, for the simple reason that we have the resources, at least those people who have somewhere where they can build a sukkah, which isn't always taken for granted in Europe, where people live in apartment buildings. But if we do have somewhere to build a sukkah, then we take it for granted that we have the material to build 4 walls and schach, and even if you're luckier to have some kind of roof contraption. And if you're even luckier, then you have an inbuilt sukkah in your house, and it's all nice and dandy, as we say. So no one has the kind of sukkahs that you find referenced in the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about the minimal dimensions of a sukkah. What are the minimal dimensions of a sukkah? 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, a square of 7 tefachim by 10 tefachim. You're talking about approximately just more than a meter by a meter by 7 tefachim is less than a meter, even less than a meter. Is less.
9 centimeters.
Right, so even less than a meter, exactly, even less than a meter by even less than a meter by maybe just more than a meter high.
Een hondenhok.
Yeah, exactly. A kennel, is that? I imagine that means a kennel. Yeah. But the fascinating thing is that the Gemara says, why can't it be smaller than that? Because smaller than that is dira srucha, which means basically it's like a squashy house. But seemingly that size, that's right. That's reasonable. To live in a kennel is reasonable, but smaller than that is too ridiculous. So who has a sukkah that small?
Compared to the length of a human being.
Yes.
Sometimes people were 150, now people are over 2 meters.
Yeah, so well, in Holland, they would certainly say that the average size needs to be bigger. But it is to do with the size of a human being. In other words, it's got to do with the size of a human being with enough space to spread out his arms. In other words, to sort of place, the Rishonim say, to place a table of approximately 1 tefach long, like in other words, a little stool in front of him, and then he sits and he eats. And that's the minimum amount. You need to sit in a little box and eat. The only time you see these kind of sukkahs nowadays is Chabad. They have all kinds of funny sukkahs on their cars and on the this and on the that. But the Mishnah talks about making the sukkah on a ship, making the sukkah on a wagon, making the sukkah on a camel, on the back of the camel between the humps.
People had deux chevaux, you know what deux chevaux?
Citroën, the old Citroën.
The old Citroën. Yeah. And they had the sukkah inside.
Van de Velde.
They opened the sunroof.
Yeah.
Van de Velde. Yeah. Van de Velde.
Of Van de Velde was dat?
Ja, open dak voor de auto.
Ja.
Die nou niet meer nodig.
Yeah. But generally speaking, we build sukkahs with much more ease and accessibility. And so our sukkahs are basically 4 by 4 walls with schach with on top. What people don't always realize is that there are even seemingly minor details that you could have a beautiful looking sukkah with a very minor detail that could disqualify the sukkah. So as a brief example, you could build the sukkah in the middle of your house. Like we said before, people have beautiful inbuilt sukkahs. There's always this, everyone always has their opinion on whether it makes it better or makes it worse. If it's nicer sukkahs to have an inbuilt sukkah, or it's not the same taste, it's not the real stuff. It's not the real sukkah. It's not the real thing. And I grew up at home with our sukkah was out in the garden, like it is ever. But the advantage, which was the disadvantage, is we had like a kind of shed that was a sukkah, and we just kept my parents had it built one year, many years ago, and they kept it up from year to year, which sounds very nice in the sense that you don't need to build your sukkah every year. But every year we went in there, we had to clear the cobwebs, the spider, spin webs, spider webs, and whatever, and the damp, and sometimes things. And some years we forgot to take the schach off for too long into the winter, so the schach gets moldy, it gets whatever. Yeah. So it had its advantages, it had its disadvantages, but it wasn't the inbuilt sukkah that some people are used to. But you have an inbuilt sukkah, and you think, what could be wrong with that? Beautiful in terms of the halachic perspective, fantastic, 4 walls, 4 solid walls, etc. But you may not realize that there could be too much ceiling in the middle, and it invalidates the sukkah. So I want to talk about a few different concepts, let's call it, of Hilchos Sukkos, the general concepts and how they might play out, and not specifically like a detailed guide of how to build sukkah, because we don't need that, but just the ideas, the fascinating concepts behind some of the laws of sukkah. I'm going to start with something called doifen hakuma. You may have come across it before. Doifen hakuma means a bent wall. That means a bent wall. The idea of doifen hakuma is as follows. The Mishnah talks about a case, the very earliest recording that we have, of a sukkah built in a house. So for those people who say that it's not traditional, it's not classical to build your sukkah inside your house, the Mishnah says that Beis Shammai did it. The Mishnah doesn't criticize him for having lost the flavor of sukkahs. It says that Beis Shammai knocked out the ceiling inside his house. He actually did it for his baby in a crib. The baby was in a crib, and Beis Shammai wanted that the baby should also fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, even though the baby's not obligated, but they should get the kind of the special spiritual atmosphere of sukkah. And they knocked out some of the ceiling over the crib and put schach on top of it. I imagine in the olden days it was probably somewhat easier to knock out ceilings. Probably they didn't have ceilings built as complex and pipe work and everything as we do, and leather plasters and cements and concrete. They probably just, if you imagine the Middle East of a couple of thousand years ago, Babylonia, they probably just, had some kind of mud or clay ceiling, and they knocked out the clay, and after sukkahs filled it back in. It was probably easier to do that than it is for us to build our sukkahs in the first place. So he knocked out some of the ceiling, and the Mishnah talks about, and other Mishnahs, it's actually a recurring idea throughout Hilchos Sukkah, throughout Gemara Sukkah, is this idea that we've got here a problem. If you knock out a part of your ceiling and you fill it with schach, fantastic, you've got kosher schach. But you've also got part of the ceiling, unless you do schach wall to wall, in other words, you knock out the whole ceiling, and whatever the dimensions of the room, whatever it is, you would do schach from wall to wall, covering the entire space of the ceiling above. You'll end up with a problem that you've got some ceiling that's not schach. Ceiling is a material, whatever it's made of. If it's this, if it's made of concrete, if it's made of clay, it's not a material that can be used to make schach. Schach has to be made from something that grows from the ground, that's currently disconnected, that hasn't been shaped into any kind of utensil, that can't receive tumah, it's not susceptible to tumah. There's a load of rules that schach has, and ceiling does not qualify as schach. I think we all know that, we can take that for granted. And so you've got a problem. You're sitting in a sukkah which partially is covered over by a material that's not fit to be used for schach. So the Gemara says, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, fascinating this, there's no indication of such halacha in the Torah. Almost every single halacha that we have that's midoraisa that comes from Torah law has some hint or indication in the pasuk, even if it's not explicit. We know that a tremendous amount of our halachas are not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. We've been speaking at length about Hilchos Shabbos, and we've said there's 39 categories of malacha which aren't explicitly mentioned in the Torah, but they're all learned out from within the psukim. From time to time, occasionally, very, very rarely, in fact, there's a number of very famous examples, we have something which is recorded in our tradition as being halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That does not mean that only these things were told to Moshe at Sinai, but other things were not told to Moshe at Sinai. That's not what it means. It's very clear. All the commentator Rambam makes that very clear. But what it does mean is that everything else is indicated somewhere in some kind of clue within the Pesukim. But this has nothing else but the tradition that we've received from Moshe that's been passed down through the generations. So it's actually quite exciting when you encounter one of these things. It's like coming in contact with something very ancient. Although all biblical halachas, all halachas min Torah are ancient, but it's like something that we've preserved, something without any foundation, without any how would you say, without any base, any sort of visible base to hold it down. We've preserved this halacha and Moshe Sinai. And the Gemara says, Doifen Akuma, the overhanging wall is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a halacha that comes down from Moshe Rabbeinu from Sinai. So we preserve this halacha.
Can you sit under?
So let's now talk about what it is.
Is it outside?
Now we'll talk about what Doifen Akuma is. Good. Now we actually talk what is it? What is it? What's the rule of Doifen Akuma? So Doifen Akuma means that rather than look, we just said before, the cases you've got the inside of your sukkah has schach, and there's and the inside of the ceiling, and parts of the ceiling are ceiling. Rather than looking at the ceiling as the Lextract shul has also inside sukkah, rather than look at the ceiling as schach, and then it would be schach that's possible, invalid schach because it's ceiling. Look at it as an extension of the wall. So the wall curves over like that. Imagine, for argument's sake, you had a big room, and the wall of the room arched over, and then there was a flat ceiling on top. Now, there's not like this room, which is diagonal and horizontal. The walls, like an archway, the walls arched over, and at some stage reached a plateau, a flat part, and that was left. No one would suggest that the arch, the curved part, is considered ceiling. They'd say it's an extension of the wall.
That means, if I understand well, that if the ceiling is like this, the room is like this, and
the ceiling like widens out,
then it is not the ceiling.
In other words, the
because
walls.
It's not an arch.
If the walls go like that, then you could also consider the walls to be Doifen Akuma.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Because we're just saying we're extending the walls further. And here it's even worse than an arch.
If they're almost flat.
Yeah, but here, think about it in this case of the sukkah we're talking about. It actually is flat. In other words, the ceiling does actually just go horizontally above everyone's heads. It's absolutely flat. But the halacha looks at it conceptually as if it's an extension of the wall. Basically, it telling us walls don't need to be vertical. Walls can also be horizontal. Who said a wall is a vertical item? It could be a horizontal item.
In the Middle East, it's quite normal that the walls
were curved over.
In the Beit Knesset, somewhere old tall house was that. Yes.
Yeah, and here we've even got it absolutely horizontal.
Yes.
And nonetheless, we're saying it's not ceiling, it's not schach, which would then be schach posel, which would be invalid schach, which would make your sukkah, which would mess up the sukkah, which would make your sukkah invalid. It's wall. It's called Doifen Akuma, overhanging wall. Now, they did say there's a caveat. They said there's a limit to how far you can go with an overhanging wall. You don't have the right to make your entire ceiling into overhanging wall. We'll talk about sitting under the wall in a minute, but for now, let's just clarify what the parameters are. An overhanging wall can only be up to a maximum of 4 amos, not tfachim, 4 amos, which is a significant amount. 4 amos are about 2 meters. So almost 2 meters. So it can be, depending on which opinion, it's either a bit more or a tiny bit less. Yeah. It can be up to almost 2 meters.
From both sides.
So one second. Let's talk about both sides. We'll get to both sides in a minute. Let's just conceptually think of one side, and then we'll get to both sides. You have now your sukkah, and the ceiling is opened up partially with schach. On one side is ceiling, and let's say the other side is schach. So long as there's not 4 amos between the edge of the wall, where the wall, what we call wall, ends, and the schach begins, then we look at it as an extension of the wall. What happens if there is more than 4 amos? It invalidates the entire sukkah. There's nowhere you can't sit even under the green part. You can't say, well, I'm under the green part. The whole sukkah is invalid if there's more than 4 amos of ceiling, right? That is totally invalid. So what's the advantage of saying doif mekoma, an overhanging wall? The advantage is it doesn't help you to sit under the wall. That has to be made very clear. You can't sit under this thing because you're not sitting under the schach. But it allows you to sit to utilize the rest of the sukkah as being a kosher sukkah. Now, this is something that needs a lot of thought. We need to think about this because we have to remember a sukkah does not need 4 walls. A sukkah only needs 3 walls.
3.5.
2.5.
2.5.
Let's call it 3 for absolutely right. 2.5. In fact, it's not 2.5.
No,
It's 2 and a tefach.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you even more than that about the tefach. But we don't realize this because, again, we don't build sukkahs with such small walls. People aren't aware. When we were in school, we learned it's a conceptual mistake that a sukkah needs to have 2 walls and a bit. And the smallest bit is a tefach. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. I'm sorry to report to you all. I hope no one takes it too hard, too badly. It's a mistake.
One tefach is 9 centimeters.
That's about 9 centimeters. In fact, it's far more than that. However, what basically the halacha stipulates, the Gemara says, it needs to be 7 tefachim, 7, not 1, the third wall. In other words, 1 full wall, 1 back wall. The third wall needs to be 7 tefachim, but of the 7, we're going to create a halachic concept whereby only 1 wall, 1 tefach is actually physical. There's 1 physical tefach, but the length of the wall is going to be 7. Now that's now how are you going to do that? It's creative. How are you going to get an area, a wall of 7 tefachim, which only has 1 tefach of physical wood, of physical wall? The answer is very simple. It involves another halachic concept called lovud. Lovud means if you have 2 items that are placed side by side, and there's less than 3 tefachim gap between the 2, then we look at the gap as if it's sealed off. That's lovud. That's the principle of lovud. So you have a stick here and a stick there, and 3 tefachim in between. We look as if it's sealed. So what we do is as follows: we have the corner of the sukkah. We've got let's try it on. Yeah, let's see if we can do something. We've got here 2 walls. 1 wall, 2 walls. Can you see? Or is the thing in the way? You've got 2 walls. From the corner of this third wall, we measure out 2 tefachim, 0.9. In other words, just less than 3 tefachim, tiny bit less than 3 tefachim, and we place a wooden beam of 1 tefach. We're now on almost 4 tefachim of closed space because you've got just under 3 tefachim of air, a beam coming up of 1 tefach. But the 1 tefach, because it's within 3 tefachim of the corner, is as if the whole area is enclosed. So you've got now 4 tefachim. You understand so far? And then we make a pesach, an entrance of another 3 tefachim. In other words, we make like an archway as an entrance. The combination of the entrance with this 1 tefach beam in so close, placed within 3 tefachim of the corner is almost 7 tefachim. It's 6.9 tefachim. If you add it up, 3 tefachim plus it's basically 6.9 tefachim. It's actually a bit more if you make a bigger opening. And there you've got a wall of a theoretical 7 tefachim, which actually only has 1 tefach of standing beam.
Go ahead. Now I have to give
Carry on.
Mars something. Go. Okay, go.
1 tefach of standing. Now that's a side. That's a side. There's a side point. Let's get back to what we're saying. A sukkah only needs to have, let's call it 3 walls. Let's say 3 walls just for the front. A sukkah needs to have 3 walls. Now, if a sukkah needs to have 3 walls, then ask you as follows: What would be the problem? Here we've got a nice room around us, 4 walls. If I have schach running from that wall to that wall and touching this wall, so it extends across half of the room. Schach extended across half of the room. Then I have a doifen. I have wall and ceiling, and the ceiling on that side, let's imagine, is more than 4 amos. More than 4 amos. This overhanging ceiling. So I just said to you before that if it's more than 4 amos, then it counts as then it doesn't count as wall. It counts as ceiling if it's more than 4 amos. But what's the problem? What's the problem exactly? Let's just say this just doesn't exist. Let's cut off theoretically that part of the sukkah and have a 3-wall sukkah that goes up until this point, which is covered by schach. I'm going to repeat it again. I'm going to say again.
3 walls seems to be enough.
3 walls is enough.
Nevertheless, must not be more than 3 tefachim between this and the wall.
Between what and the wall?
This is not be.
But we don't need this wall.
No.
Let's say this wall is a mile away. It's a kilometer away. We don't need it. It's not there. We don't need it at all.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
It's okay.
Yes.
Because actually we have 3 walls. So we just say fine. I'm not sitting under that, and I'm not using this part of the room at all as a sukkah. I'm going to consider 1 wall, 2 wall, 3 wall, and I'm going to ignore this and ignore the ceiling on top. So it's bigger than 4 amos. Who cares? What do I mind? I'm going to ignore it. That's all very well. It's all very nice if you have it only on one side. If you have it on 2 sides, if you were to have an overhanging wall of 4 amos on one side and 4 amos from the other,
then you probably.
then you don't have. Then now you can't quite count this wall because it's too far. Can't count that wall. And now you've got a disqualified sukkah. To understand that even within Doif Nakuma, technically speaking, we could exclude. They can't see my face. They must be no part. They can exclude parts. We can cut off part of the sukkah theoretically, but it will only help if we still have 3 walls and schach. Now, I want to ask you a question about Doif Nakuma. It's going to sound like a very abstract philosophical question, but there's actually a very interesting practical difference. When we say Doif Nakuma, when we say that we take this as long as it's up to 4 amos, up to 4 amos, we extend the wall to meet the schach, and we don't say that it's invalid schach. We look at it as an extension of the wall. Is it that we say that the wall extends all the way to the schach, which is basically how I've been explaining it until now, that this piece of vertical ceiling actually is like a piece of wall? In other words, who said wall is a horizontal entity? Maybe a wall is also a vertical entity, and therefore the wall just goes all the way to the schach. Is that how we look at it? Or do we look at it that the wall ends there, where it ends vertically, finished, that's where the wall ends, but so long as the schach is within 4 amos of the wall, we look at it as if the schach is connected to the wall, and we ignore the piece in the middle.
Yes.
Do you hear the well, before we even suggest answers, I'm going to explain it again. It sounds very philosophical. We call it in yeshiva, we'll call it a chakira. We're making an investigation here. We've established a halacha that if you have a wall and it connects to a piece of ceiling that's 4 amos long, up to 4 amos, then we don't say it's invalid schach, ceiling is invalid schach. What we do say is that it's just an extension of the wall. The wall is an overhanging wall. Doif Nakuma means a bent wall. It's a wall that goes bent. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean that the vertical part of ceiling is just another part of the wall, a physical extension of the wall, in which case it's like saying walls don't need to be vertical entities. Walls can even be horizontal entities. So long as it's within 4 amos, a wall is both vertical and horizontal. In other words, the wall goes, that's the wall. Or do we look at it? No. A wall is a vertical entity. Sorry, that's what a wall is. That's what we know. A ceiling is a horizontal entity. The wall goes whoop, and the ceiling goes whoop. But the wall stops there, it ends there. There's a piece of ceiling. This piece of ceiling is problematic, but because it's less than 4 amos, we just imagine that the schach is touching the wall. We just say the schach is touching the wall. We just say that a piece of ceiling that's less than 4 amos long, 4 amos across, is not there, it's not visible, or it is there, but it doesn't invalidate a sukkah, however you want to look at it. Those are 2 different ways of looking at this concept. So you say, what's the difference?
The difference is, I think, the concept of what a wall is in connection with schach. So, because if you have schach, are you allowed to put schach on a vertical wall? Because if this is the wall, and you extend it, not a ceiling, that's a wall. Who's putting schach on a wall? I mean, the concept is strange. So is there a special thing that the concept of schach together with wall is an entity, or are the 2 things apart?
It's
very beautiful. But
because then you can have maybe different answers, but I wouldn't say so. But if you don't define that, then it will be a strange thing.
If you have a wall and you have a balcony above you, you have a sukkah and a little balcony or something from the roof over the schach, that's not considered as is it also kind of law of Dofen and Kuma or not? When it's so it doesn't touch the schach, but it's a little bit.
It's higher.
And also we what you have often in here in Goedlaar in Holland and in England, you have a roof to close it when rain is falling. So if you open, but sometimes people don't open it half.
That's the problem.
And you've got it overhanging over the sukkah.
Yeah.
Don't find it's
Of the trees.
Okay, will be schach enough. Enough.
Je zit kosher.
Yeah,
you sit go.
Het kosher bij zo'n paard is.
But if it's more than 4 amos,
under
the roof.
But the other problems, because you're speaking about die dingen die om omlaag gaan, but you can also make a zeil and like in the tent. You make it all hell, but it's not allowed.
Yeah, it's not allowed.
Not allowed.
Take it away. Talk about that as well.
You have to take it away.
You know, there is an opinion.
Yes.
There is an opinion. It's not followed in Shulchan Aruch halachically. There is an opinion in the Rishonim, Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, that if you cover your sukkah with a sheet, in order to protect you from the rain, a sheet to protect from rain, a plastic tarpaulin, whatever, the sukkah does not become invalid. It's still valid, and you can make birkas leishe sukkah in it. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
You don't have to.
Have you ever heard of such a thing? Have you ever heard of such a thing? I wanted to sink in. According to Rabbeinu Tam, there's a concept, there's a possibility, at least according to one understanding in Rabbeinu Tam. But I'm going to make a disclaimer: we do not, according to halacha, follow this opinion whatsoever, which is why no one has ever practiced this. Rabbeinu Tam says that a covering that is designed simply to protect the person in the sukkah from the elements. It's based on a Mishnah. It's actually a Mishnah in the first parak of sukkah. The covering is an invalid covering. In other words, everyone agrees that tarpaulin is not material that can be used for schach. But he says, but you've got schach, you have schach, and you merely drape some kind of sheet to protect you from the rain. It doesn't invalidate the schach. That's what Rabbeinu Tam says. It doesn't invalidate the schach. No, it's not halacha. No. Everyone who's listening, please, nobody go out and say something.
Als je een dak hebt, een houten dak, hoef je dat ook niet open te maken.
Is
hetzelfde?
Hetzelfde.
Yes, it has to. That's for Shabbos. Absolutely.
A question about the definition of schach.
Okay, I'm going to get back to that comment in a minute. Go.
Can you say that the schach, which is leaning on let's say, an extension of a wall, but still horizontal, is that supposed to be schach? What's the definition of schach?
Again,
you have to look through it. you have to see something.
So the schach, where's the schach in your case?
In your opinion, you said from this side of the room to that side that here in the middle is some opening.
Yeah.
So is this still called schach?
No, you can't sit under it.
You said so.
No, don't come. You
Okay,
can't.
okay.
If it's ceiling, sorry, you can't sit under it. The question we're asking is, does it invalidate the rest?
Yeah, okay.
Does it make even the kosher schach non-kosher? In other words, if you have too much of this doif and
If
akuma,
you don't call it schach, there's no problem. It's a question of naming it because this is schach and this is not
yes,
schach.
but if the doif and akuma is more than 4 amos long,
It's not.
then it knocks everything out. Then
Yeah,
even the
that's-
kosher
that's-
schach,
that's for
that's
sure.
the
for
punchline.
sure.
Yeah, right.
I was
Okay.
asked here about closing the sukkah. So why it's allowed? And the rabbi had another question. Why are we allowed to close the door on Shabbos?
Yes, but here we go. We can go on forever and ever. But closing sukkah roofs is a very interesting halachic sugya within itself, because you've got, like you said, this problem of opening and closing, the theoretical problem. It's not a problem in reality, but the discussion about opening and closing roofs on Shabbos, because you're making an oyel, you're making and on that, basically the simple not solution, but the simple understanding is that the halacha determines that when you have something that's connected to the structure, to the land-based structure from before Shabbos and designed to be frequently opened, and it's, as I said, it's no different to opening and closing the door. When I open the door and I close it, we don't call it building. Oh, there was a cavity here in the wall and I closed it with a door. It's not called building by no means, because the door is always connected and it's designed, its function as part of the building is to open and close. So when the sukkah roof is connected from before and designed to be opened and closed, then you've knocked out the problem. There's another problem with the sukkah roof that people don't often consider. It's not a problem in reality, but a discussion regarding the problem is that, again, it's something. It's so interesting, but it's something we could give a whole share on. They're just bullet points. These, it's just notes. There's an idea in Hilchos Sukkah. The Torah says, "Shivas yomim ta'aselecha." Sukkahs ta'aselecha be'osnechom garnchom mikvecha. Ta'aselecha means you have to make. In certain areas of halacha, we have a principle that's called ta'aseh v'lo ha'osun. That means you have to make it, but not that it is made. What does that mean? Not that it is made. Make it, but not that it is made. If I have for example, a house, and for whatever reason, I don't know. Let's say I have a sukkah, and I build a sukkah in the house. Not the house is the sukkah, like we've been speaking about until now. In this room, I build a wooden sukkah with schach. Everything is as it looks, the ceiling, whatever. But inside it, I build a little sukkah for myself. So you tell me, is the sukkah kosher or not kosher? It's absolutely not kosher, because there's roof on top, there's ceiling on top. It's not kosher. We all know that the sukkah has to be underneath the sky. Even trees can't overhang it, etc. So then I've built my sukkah, and then I go along, and I say, okay, so I've now built the sukkah, but the last thing that needs to be fixed is I need to remove the ceiling. So I remove the ceiling from on top of the sukkah, not the case we've been speaking about until now, where the ceiling gets filled up with schach. That's what we've been talking about until now. A different case, I build a sukkah within the room with schach on top of my sukkah. A few centimeters above, let's call it, is the ceiling. And I then remove the ceiling afterwards. The sukkah is now a kosher sukkah, technically, because the sukkah is now exposed to the sky, is it not? Says the Gemara, says the halacha, ta'aseh v'lo min ha'osu. You have to make a sukkah, and not that the sukkah is made. In the case that I opened up the ceiling, it created, without me touching the sukkah, I never touched anything, I never did anything to the sukkah. Suddenly, magically, the sukkah was now kosher. So I didn't make a sukkah. I did an action, external action, that allowed the sukkah to be made. It's passive or active. The Torah says you have to actively make the schach and not passively render the schach kosher. Understand the difference? Ta'aseh v'lo min ha'osu.
That means that the first one was not the sukkah.
It wasn't a sukkah.
No, so don't go.
On that-
that's not a problem.
But you haven't done. But then you haven't yet made your sukkah.
You made something that's not kosher.
Which is not. So how would you then go about making it kosher after that?
That's not the way to put it.
You would go and you would-
should not put schach on it. Make the thing and put it. Of course, then.
So there's one or two ways to it. Either in such a theoretical case, you would put the schach on after you've removed the ceiling, in which case you put it on with kosher. Or you put the schach on, take it, and then you move the schach. You shake it. You shake all the schach across the area of the sukkah, in which case the halacha considers it as if you re-put on the schach. Now this halacha is very, very relevant. I'm going to tell you why it's relevant. Listen to this, because you think the case I just said is completely ridiculous. Who's making the sukkah inside the house and removing the ceiling? I'm going to tell you how it could be relevant in my own sukkah every single year. I have a sukkah, like many people have, that's a canvas. It's a canvas sukkah on poles, on a metal structure, and you attach the canvas all the way around.
Just like in Israel. So for
Yeah. So first I make a structure, the pole structure that slots into each other. Then I put the canvas round, and then I put the schach on. What happens if I do like this? What happens if I make the pole structure,
yes,
and then I put the schach across the top, because the schach sits rests on the support poles. So I put the schach across the top,
and then
I
afterwards you
attach the
make the
walls,
walls.
and then I attach the walls.
No, it's
What
not
happens if I
allowed.
do? Why not?
First, you have to make the walls.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because of what we just said. Because exactly what I said. Because a sukkah means you cover over the walls. You need to have minimum amount of walls.
Yeah.
We said 2 walls and a tefach. One second, you have walls and you cover it with schach. If I put the schach on and then I make the walls, then when I put the schach on without the walls, there's no sukkah, because a sukkah needs to have walls. When I then attach the walls on passively, not actively, passively, the schach becomes schach on top of the sukkah. But we've just said that ta'aseh v'lo mina osu. You have to actively make the schach and not allow the schach to become passively kosher.
So what
So you see, it's a common problem. It's a common.
But you do is also do something.
Then I
with
can
the
shake
stuff
it, then I
and
can shake it.
Okay.
But that's
Symbolisch,
okay.
Shabbos, ik zit in de sukkah, it's going to rain.
Yeah.
I close the roof, there's no sukkah anymore.
Yes.
So
That-
then I
Here we
open
go.
it again.
It's ta'aseh v'lo mina osu. Here we go. That's where we get it to. Thank you very much, my good friend. So you see what the problem now is. I've got a massive problem for you. When I close my sukkah roof, when it rains, in the middle of sukkahs, I built a sukkah, I built it right, I did the walls first, then I did the schach, I got everything right. Comes Yom Tov, starts to rain, sadly. If you live in Manchester, it's inevitable, it will happen. If you live in Holland, you've got a chance. The first night of sukkahs in Manchester is a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. There's
You have to wait.
almost every year it was raining when I grew up. I remember I have I'm being recorded, so my dad doesn't watch this, but I have childhood traumas of my father sitting there looking outside, and he's getting increasingly upset because he wants to go out to the sukkah, the first night of sukkahs, and do the mitzvah, and it's just raining and raining and raining and raining and raining. And we're all getting agitated because we just want to eat. We're kids, we just want to eat. We don't, just come on already, it's getting late. And he's saying, let's wait a little bit longer. It's traumatic. That's why I had to move. But anyway, cutting long story short, so it starts raining on sukkahs. So what do? You close the roof. Is the sukkah kosher? No, it's not kosher. There's a roof on top.
Anymore.
There's no sukkah anymore. It stops raining. What do you do when it stops raining? You open the roof. You've done an action that passively made the sukkah kosher. Do you hear the problem?
Yeah.
Every time you close the roof, you invalidate the sukkah. And when you reopen it, you actively validate this, you passively validate the schach. You make it kosher again.
So why?
And we just said that you can't do that. Everyone was bothered by this. The Ramah's bothered by it, everyone's bothered by it. And what they say, which is connected to Hilchos Shabbos, is that they say that once you built the sukkah in a kosher manner, and you simply cover over it to protect it, in other words, to protect you or it from the rain, you're not invalidating the sukkah. It's like a halfway stage. It's a creative middle stage. It's invalid to the extent that it's not a sukkah, that you can't sit, well, you can sit in it because you can sit wherever you want, but you can't make a brocha when you sit in that sukkah of leishei sukkah. It's not kosher, but you've not invalidated it to the extent that we consider the sukkah not to exist, kind of thing. Because once you've made it, it's called hechsheroi, asiyosoi behechsher. If it's been created in the right way, it's established in the correct halachic way, it's now a kosher sukkah. It gets a rubber stamp of approval from the Beis Din. Here we go, rubber stamp, your sukkah's good. From now on, you're allowed to temporarily invalidate it, temporarily, without running into problems that you've, as if, destroyed the sukkah and recreated it each time. That's the authorities for already centuries said that it must be like that, not because people were doing it, but because it can't be that the Torah, that's what Torah meant, because there's numerous examples in the Mishnah of spreading sheets over the sukkah to protect them and this and that. It must be very simply that once the sukkah is asiyosoi behechsher, as long as it's been made, established, it's now done, it's rubber stamped through, it's got a hechsher, it's made right, you can then temporarily invalidate it and validate it each time.
So the solution would be that everybody who does it this way put on his sukkah a CS.
Yes, yeah.
Like my sukkah has an hechsher.
You have to.
So why don't it?
Someone's going to
easy.
someone's going to take your idea. Some rabbi, someone's going to take your idea and make a lot of money. They're going to make a lot of money. They're going to go around and they're going to say, Rabbi Stanton, for a small fee, I will write a little document that you can hang on your sukkah that you made it right.
Why isn't this to be a solution?
Yeah, but it's not something that we need to.
I mean, finding people and say,
yeah, but
did you do it the right?
But that's
I said, I did it with the right intention.
That's why I say to you, I preempted at the beginning of the Shia that in fact Hilchos Sukkah does have complications that people aren't always aware of. In fact, that's true. But notwithstanding that, because we are.
Just in case someone needs.
Nee, we don't need
Nee,
it.
don't need any more.
Maar wij niet meer.
Er is maar één pakje in het hele huis. Dat is fantastisch. Hè? Eén pak melk.
Secreet.
Ongelooflijk.
You're being recorded.
Oh,
We'll delete that part.
Ja, dat is nou weer leuk.
Wat?
Anyway, the answer really is that because we can count ourselves lucky, that generally speaking, one can assume that we have the resources to build a sukkah, eat with ease in the right way. So we're not particularly worried, but it doesn't negate the fact that there are things that could invalidate a sukkah. That's exactly what we've been trying to establish today. And most of us are aware, like you said before, without necessarily knowing the reasons behind things. You know that the walls go first and then the schach. So because we built a sukkah, Baruch Hashem, we've all been busy with sukkahs many times in our lives. So we have a certain regilos, a certain fluency in the basic way to build a sukkah, and that's absolutely good. But it is fundamental at some stage that people are aware of what could be problematic, so that at least they can avoid it or ask if there's a questionable area. And here you see fascinating things that a sukkah that you, exactly like I said, you might encounter a sukkah and it looks perfect, 4 walls, schach, and the person, without knowing, the person put the schach before the walls. It's not kosher sukkah. Also. So it's very interesting how that plays out. But that question was a very crucial question in understanding the mechanisms of a roof. Is that not just the Shabbos issue, but once we know this concept, this building block we said of tasev alomina osoi, making actively and not passively, and suddenly we say, hey, every time we open and close the sukkah, we may have a problem. So it's interesting to see how the halacha answers itself up. In other words, the halacha has to deal with numerous problems the whole time that we aren't even often aware of what's going on sort of behind the scenes, which is very interesting. But I want to get very quickly back, we've only got a few minutes left, to Doifan Akuma, to the overhanging wall. To finish it, I asked you a philosophical investigation, a hakira. The philosophical question was, are the walls extending all the way? Is that what's happening? Or is it just that we ignore that strip of ceiling? So then I said, okay, philosophy, you can go to the FU. My good friend Bas, we've had philosophical discussions before in the past. Philosophy is very nice and fine. But you'll say to me, Rabbi, you're not a philosopher. you're telling people, how to build a kosher sukkah. What difference does it make? In halacha, we call that, in the Gemara, we call it my nafka mina. It's very nice to philosophize, but what's the practical difference? It's very interesting, by the way, such a thing, just as an aside. This is something that I must share with you, because in secular studies, there's nothing inherently wrong with philosophizing with no practical outcome. Just for the sake, philosophy for the sake of philosophy. The Mishnah says, the Gemara says, Godol halimud hamevi lidei maisa. Learning has to bring about action. Learning Torah has to bring about action. Everything has to bring some kind of action. It's not just abstract. The Torah is not supposed to be abstract, to the extent that even the areas of Torah that don't seem to apply, we're always busy trying to find practical differences to our lives. It might just be how to be a better person, the moral lessons it teaches us, the ethical lessons. There's always something that should generate a response. It shouldn't just be abstract. And the Gemara doesn't appreciate questions of a philosophical nature that don't have a practical outcome.
Only as a dessert.
Only as a dessert. Yeah, maybe as a dessert. Maybe when we finish the Shia. It has to have so now I asked you a very nice philosophical question. Do we look at it that it's an extension, or do we look at it? What's the practical difference? I'm going to tell you, listen to this. I'm going to have to stand up for this one. The practical difference is as follows. What happens if you have a wall of a sukkah that goes only till here? The frame of the sukkah extends further, but the wall goes till here. And then there's a gap. There's a gap over there.
Not more than 3 tefachim.
I'm sorry to have to correct you. As long as you're absolutely right, the other way around. If you have 10 tefachim from the ground up of solid wall, then you can have as far as you like, as long as it's up to 20 amos. 20 amos is a max. You can have basically several meters more of space. So long as you've established a solid base of the wall. You're right, the other way around. If you were to have more than a 3 tefachim gap from the floor up, then even if the wall would be solid for 3 meters, it wouldn't be good, because it's not like the wall is connected to the ground. But this way around, where you've got solid wall up, at least 10 tefachim, let's say 2 meters up, and then you've got a gap, is fine. That's normally fine. The frame extends higher, the schach is higher up, it's fine. What happens if you have the combination of both problems? You have a wall that extends up till here, fine, then gap, then ceiling, and then schach. Do you hear the combination?
The schach is...
The same case we've been talking about until now for a while, which is doif nakuma, an overhanging wall, a ceiling that carries on, and then the schach starts later on, which we said, as long as it's not 4 amos, great. We look at it as an extension of the wall. But here, you can't extend the wall. Here, the wall finished here. The extension, it's very nice to extend a wall up and across if the wall actually extends up and across. But in the case that the wall doesn't extend up, then just because you've got a strip of ceiling, you can't connect it to the wall because there's a gap. In other words, normally, you're with me? Normally, we would say if the schach went all the way to the corner and there's a gap in the wall, fantastic. As long as the wall is enough height, the gap is fine. That's all good. That's all fine. But here, you're trying to combine 2 different solutions. You've got a gap in the wall from here to there. You've got a strip of ceiling, and you want to say that the ceiling is part of the wall. But wait a minute, it doesn't actually connect to the wall. So if we say that the concept, the principle of doif nakuma is that it's an extension of the wall, it's a physical extension of the wall, then it would only be possible to apply such a principle where the wall actually joined with the ceiling. But if you say that doif nakuma is not a physical extension of the wall, it's an abstract extension of the wall, then who cares? As long as the wall is kosher, and this part of ceiling is small enough to be considered not ceiling or part of the wall, then who cares that there's a bit of ceiling? It's fine still, because as long as it's not more than 4 amos wide, it's fine. So you see that there's a very practical outcome that depends on how you look at doif nakuma. If it's a extension, an absolute extension, a physical extension of the wall, then it has to be that it's really an extension of the wall, that the wall extends up to the doif nakuma. that if you see it as not a physical extension of the wall, but an abstract piece of wall, then who cares that it doesn't extend? It wasn't me who invented this. The Rishonim spoke about it already. The commentators, the Ram on the Gemara, and the consensus of the authorities is that Doif Nakum, and it's how the Shulchan Aruch literally words it very clearly. The Doif Nakum principle is an extension of the wall. And the Shulchan Aruch says, Dahainu, it means to say that the wall extends round the ceiling. Therefore, in order to apply the principle of Doif Nakuma, it's imperative that the wall touches the ceiling, that the wall goes all the way up. So even though in a normal case, the wall doesn't need to go all the way up, but if you're using the principle of Doif Nakuma, the wall has to go all the way up.
But it can still be a gap in this part.
Three to five,
Yeah,
up to 3 to 5, because then it's lawful, because then it's like connected.
The wall, you get something.
Three to 5, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Up to that's like it's connected, and that we say in scientific jargon QED.
Yeah,
QED.
Yeah.
So that,
What
yeah, or my maths teacher in school. My maths teacher in school who said QED, quite easily done. Okay, good.
QAD. Yeah, quite easy.
Fine.
Yeah.
That's the Doif Nakuma principle. So yeah, it's time.
Okay.
Should we carry on?
He's not here.
Everyone can have a break. Everyone can have a break. Do you know, I want to give over these Hilchos Sukkah share with my kids have. It's called magnetiles. Do you know these magnetiles that kids have today? It's a toy that it's like a more modern toy. It's fun. The kids can spend weeks and weeks with it. It's brilliant. It's so simple. It's little squares, plastic squares. There's other shapes as well, but generally it's plastic squares. And on the perimeter of the squares, embedded in the squares, tiny magnets. So all the squares have magnets on all 4 sides. Little plastic squares, not blocks, not cubes, like squares, like almost 2D, like thin squares. And there's magnets all the way around, and the magnets are strong enough that you can make structures by just not even slotting. It's not something even fitting in like pieces like Lego. It just, you touch them and you can build all structures, and the ceilings hold because the magnets are strong enough that if you put enough together, it holds. And you could, it crossed my mind recently that we could demonstrate a lot of principles of Hilchos Sukkah very easily in a share with just a stack of magnetiles.
There's a question about electrons. Question about electrons.
Yeah.
They move.
They move.
Same with electricity.
Yeah.
So it's still the equation.
With magnets.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
make an other day.
Yes.
Thank you. October. 13 November is okay?
Let me have a quick look.
Ja,
November,
ik ben vol.
Nee, ik blijf nog even weg. Het is goed.
Ja, oké.
Ik kom zo terug.
At the moment, I don't see why not.
Okay.
Kom niet terug.
This time I'll put it in now already.
Nee, maar
Dat hij hoest. Dat is goed.
Wie hoest? Dat is toch niks bijzonders?
Nee.
Dat zijn de haren van. Daar heb ik veel last van, maar dat is helemaal niets.
daarom. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ben jij weg?
Sure, ik hoop je.
Bedankt voor het lijnen. Je hebt een hele luide stem. En,
Ja, oké. Oké, start. Thank you very
Wat
much.
te drinken, Santi?
Kom zo.
Thee is goed.
Thee.
Thee is goed. Hebben we nog water?
Nou, dat hoop ik.